Lalgees almost. They're like,
Oh,
yeah,
you
they're really
know.
good. I do
Oh.
know from Blackpool, so I should know.
So like digestive crackers, those are my favorite. Do you know about
What are,
those?
what are they?
Digestive crackers? They're like,
Oh, the digestive biscuits.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I
those are
love
good.
those. Yeah. Oh, Ian's here. We got Louise. No lunch for her. Now listen, this working lunch, this is why we're talking about food, because this actually is working lunch. We're early, but the rest of our audience, most of our audience is Europe. I mean, they're in the UK, so they're eating lunch right now. Um,
I love that we're
so
talking about chocolate digestive. So
yeah, it's making me
that's
hungry
awesome.
for one. Yum. So as everyone, hi Audra, hi David, and Pippa's here. We've got all kinds of wonderful people in the lunchroom. So as everyone is coming in, we've got a fun topic today. We are blasting past fear by being your authentic self on social. And
Yeah.
we're going to be talking to somebody who's kind of a master at it. Joel, I was very happy, first of all, that at approximately 10 o'clock last night, you were cool enough to flex with my oops, I forgot about daylight savings time. So, but
All good.
you got to sleep in there a little bit.
Yeah, well, it was on my calendar for the right time. So it was everything worked out.
Oh, you know why? Because I went back in and changed it.
There you go.
Yeah, that's why. I was trying to make it look like I had it together. Morning, Sefik. And Kat is here. Ooh, homemade lemon and coconut cake.
That
Yum.
sounds amazing.
That sounds great. Yeah, I already ate. I always have apples for breakfast, but that sounds awesome. And walnut and coffee cake. Yum. Hi, Annette. Well, everyone is filing in, and so we are going to go ahead and do our intros today, Joel. I know you. I know that you're a LinkedIn legend, and I think it's hilarious. I just saw something on Facebook where it was like, "Who's this LinkedIn legend?" I'm like, "He's our guest on the show."
That is
gonna,
awesome.
gonna teach us some tricks. Um,
Yes.
so why don't you introduce yourself and let us know a little bit about you and what you do, Joel?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you for having me on
Mhm.
this show. And we had daylight savings this week, so everything has been shifted time wise. So this week has actually been a little bit more challenging than expected, but that is okay. So background on myself, I am from the recruitment agency world. I spent the last 6 years working for an agency. I was a full desk recruiter, so I was selling, um, selling myself and then placing candidates. And I worked within the U.S. construction market, so I worked with clients that ranged from 200 million a year all the way up to 2 billion a year, and just placing mid-level managers all the way up to C-suite. And about 2 years ago, I started noticing on LinkedIn that the platform was changing. Like video was getting more popular. There were, I think when I started noticing LinkedIn, there was like this 30-day challenge that had gone viral, and everybody was posting like videos of themselves, like selfies of themselves for 30 days. And I don't know, I just started looking at the content and thinking to myself, there's like these short written posts that are getting hundreds of likes, thousands of likes, but I'm looking and reading it and just thinking, this doesn't look that difficult to do, if I'm honest. Like I'm looking at it and going, I think I could do this. And one of the things that I kept seeing on those posts were people just talking about like inbound leads and how you can use content, which was a foreign idea to me. Like I'm not a big social media guy. And so I started hearing like content and branding, and you can build a brand to kind of generate leads. And I was at that point in my recruitment career where things were pretty steady. There was obviously the ups and downs, but I was kind of just getting sick of like this notion that everything had to be outbound, outbound, outbound. And I started thinking, well, if it's possible for people to get hundreds of likes and thousands of views, can I do the same thing? And surely if I spent time focusing on that, I could potentially take away some of the need for just constant outbound activity. And so I just started posting videos on LinkedIn, and the first videos I posted were terrible. They were like 5 minutes long, and I'd never done video. It was very foreign to me. My written posts were just as bad. Like, I didn't really know what to write about. But I just kept it going, and I found that, like, you know what, I actually enjoyed it. And candidates I was working with, and then clients I was working with just started mentioning, like, in calls that we would have, like, hey, I've seen your content. And so I was like, okay, so people are seeing this, like, they're not interacting with it. That's okay, but they're seeing it. And so I just kept going. And about 3 months into this, so I was posting every day for 3 months, I started really seeing traction with the posts. So I started seeing more likes, more views. And that obviously just encouraged me to keep going. And then right around 9 months into my journey, I started getting a real, real inbound leads. And I remember the first job order that landed on in my inbox. It was, I'd switched markets. So I was focusing on a new market, and I'd just been reaching out to owners and presidents of companies, and at the same time posting every day. And I connected with an owner of a company that was in the industry that I'd switched to. And 2 weeks later, I got a message in my inbox saying, hey, can you send me your contract? I'd love to work with you. We had an inbound call, and it was one of the best, like, job intakes I'd ever taken. And subsequently from that, I started submitting candidates pretty quickly within a 2-week time frame. And there wasn't the usual pushback, like when you're working with a new client and they don't necessarily trust you, and they're kind of skeptical about the people you're sending. That wasn't there. And suddenly it dawned on me, like, okay, this stuff really works. But I noticed, like, my sales managers, the people I was working with at the time, and the people who were basically leadership in the company, they just weren't on board with what I was doing. And I was just thinking, you know what, this is a need in the recruitment space.
Excited.
And I think, like, it makes sense. And the more that I see this within the recruitment space, it makes sense to me, like, why the resistance is there. Because it's something which it's hard to measure the ROI on. But I noticed that there was a shortage of, to me, it comes down to, like, training and equipping people. And I said, you know what, I want to fill that void. And so I started getting into coaching and training within the recruitment space of, like, how can I train teams of recruiters on how to effectively use LinkedIn, how to effectively do content in a way that's not overwhelming and, like, not really, like, just boring, but a way that's authentic and allows people to be themselves as well. And so now that's what I do. I'm working with a British company, actually, called Hoxo Media, and we have an academy where we teach people for 8 weeks foundations on LinkedIn content, LinkedIn profile, engagement, and really just building a strategy around that LinkedIn time. And so super exciting. We just launched in the US 2 months ago. So that's a long introduction there, but that is what I'm up to.
I love that introduction. It covered all the bases. And I think that the one thing that I really latched onto there is that it was your fearlessness, really, that kind of propelled you into that space. Because
I think it could have been even just, I was naive. Like, I didn't make it a thing, and I think I've noticed this, like, the more I'm in this space, the more I notice, like, there's a pressure nowadays for personal branding. There's a pressure for content. There's a pressure for showing up. And back then, that wasn't in my mind. Like, I didn't set out to create a personal brand. I set out to just make videos. And so it wasn't like I was fearless. I think there was just a knowledge gap of, like, oh, this is actually a thing that people are putting pressure on themselves to do. So yeah, I don't know how much. I don't want to like say initially, like, oh, like, there was, like, this kind of fearless, and I knew what was going to happen. I think there was definitely a knowledge gap of I was kind of naive a little bit at the beginning.
Well, maybe that whole ignorance is bliss thing is true, when you're
yes.
Because I think that fear is the thing that, and this is the whole reason we're doing the show. I think that fear is the thing that is holding so many people back from, because when you put your authentic self out there, you run the risk of finding out that people don't like it.
100%. And I will say that that's a true, that this, with every fear, right, there's going to be truth behind that fear. And so that definitely happens, but there's another balance too, where when you put yourself out there in a real way, you attract people to yourself as well. So I've come to look at it as a time saver. Like, there's definitely people who have removed me as a connection, or they've blocked me, or they've, kind of hated on me. But it saves me time, because then I know, okay, well, that person was never somebody who I would work with well in the real world. And I think as salespeople, we've kind of trained ourselves to think that everybody's a prospect if we can just convince them. And it's just not the truth. Like, you can cold call someone 100 times, and then you get them on the phone and you have a really bad conversation, and they're not somebody you can realistically work with. And so I've come to the idea that the more real you can be with your content, even though it can be a scary thing for people to see who you are, and maybe there's levels to vulnerability and how personal you get, obviously, but you can be authentic without being vulnerable, which is a kind of a different thing. But the more real you're able to be, and the more of yourself you're able to be, you're going to attract people that are like, man, that really resonates with me, or I could see myself working. And
like her style. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think for like a lot of people, like, I think within the recruitment space, for example, if you've been in the space for 10, 15 years, you know a lot of people. Yep. So everybody knows you. Like, hopefully everybody knows you, because you've been doing your job. And so when you start to show up, the first people that respond are people you might have worked with 5 years ago. And it's just a great way to stay top of mind at the end of the day. And it's a great way to, attract those people, just stay top of mind. And what you find is that the first people that respond are people that you've placed, a couple of years ago, or people you've worked with. And suddenly, like, oh man, Joel, I remember him. Yeah, he did a really great job. Let me reach out to him. And so I think if you've actually been in the space for a long time, you've got a huge advantage. But it is getting past that fear and just realizing, like, yeah, it's a risk when you put yourself out there. But what you find is, like, for every one or two hateful comments, there's like 100 comments of people who are supporting you, or you get DMs like, man, that really meant a lot. Because I think a lot of people suffer from that same fear. And, they know that, like, it just take pushing through that barrier of fear to be able to start putting yourself out there. And so people want to appreciate that, and they want to cheer you on. Of course, you're going to get a couple of haters who are going to say really negative things. But, like LinkedIn, which is the primary platform that I teach, it's a pretty supportive platform. If you want to see real hate, go look at my TikTok. I get 16-year-olds, and they're a lot meaner than anybody on LinkedIn.
They're mean.
So they're super mean.
Well, and Louise is she's echoing exactly what you're saying. Being you online is a great shortcut to people knowing if they like you. And you're right, it's true. It's how you're going to find your tribe, and the people who are like, wow, I like what she's saying. I like her voice. I like her opinion and her ethics. And then when you were saying how that very first intake that you had, and you weren't feeling all of that normal pushback or the questioning, but it's because you had already established your credibility with that prospective client online through your content.
Exactly. And I think that's where, so at that point in time too, I was, the firm that I was at, I had actually just switched firms. So I had a non-compete, so I had to switch into a brand new industry. And so that was literally, like, I didn't really have any credibility within the industry. I just had my content where I was sharing about, like, recruitment best practices, but it wasn't like I was known in that industry. And so, but there was a likability there in the call. Like, I could tell they wanted to be on the phone with me, which, in all of my time in recruitment of, like, outbound work, that first call, you're still trying to establish yourself. Unless obviously it's a really warm referral and you got in there because, from a trusted referral. But I think showing up online, it accelerates that trusted referral as well. And so, again, like, I think if you've been in recruitment for a long time, you just have a huge advantage. And I think the negative connotation that comes along with it is like personal branding, because right now personal branding is really like a buzzword, and even authenticity, it's a buzzword. But it's not complicated. It is literally sharing some stories that happened this week. It's maybe sharing a couple of failures, a couple of successes, and then sharing things that you think other people are going to find valuable or are going to be fun. It's that simple. But there's a mind block because you got a million coaches out there like prescribing like methods of how to do things.
Right.
And to be honest, like when I bring up personal branding with people, I can see the negative feeling that comes along with that, because there's a feeling of like, I've got to manufacture something. And, and then you start getting into, well, I've got to show up in a valuable way. And, the problem is like value is super subjective. So to try and define what something is, if something's value is, it's super hard, and everybody values different things. And I think people
and imposter syndrome is a very real thing, where people don't feel
exactly.
like they have anything valuable to say, even though I've been doing this 10 years. I mean, what do you do with that person, Joel, when they're like, I don't have anything to say?
I think that, I think that even in the things that I'm doing, because I can look at like a LinkedIn profile, for example, and for me, there's a lot of basics that people aren't doing. And so like, for example, like the banner on your LinkedIn, like that background photo, like to me, it's a basic, like, oh, well, you need to display your company and you need to display what you do and you need to show authority. Very simple concept in my mind, because I've been doing this now for 2 years. But to some people, I'll start going through like their banner and their headline, and you can just see that it's like a revelation to them. And so I think, for us, things that seem simple are simple because we know them. So it's just easy to think your own knowledge is simple. But for a lot of people, like something that's simple to you, it could be, a revelation for someone else. And so that's just a lie that all of us have. And so I'm sure like a brain surgeon who's studied the brain, it's probably supernatural to them now, and they just know, okay, yeah, this is how the brain works. But if they would explain it to me, it'd be revolutionary. So I think we all suffer with that. And the way you break past that is again, it's like you have to retrain your mind, and you have to realize, that we all have inherent value. And, and even like, to me, like humor is like super valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you've got the ability to make people laugh, that's massively underrated on a platform like LinkedIn. And for me, like humor and like lightheartedness is a big deal. And especially nowadays, where in the UK, for example, they're on a big lockdown, people are craving that connectivity and that humanity. So actually being able to be human and being able to be yourself is a huge thing. And it's underrated. And in our mind, we could think, oh, well, that's just stupid, or what value is that to the industry? And it's like, well, no, it's someone will find value in that. And so it's just breaking past these
Someone
mindsets.
needed a laugh today.
Yeah. Someone did. And it's like, I think, but then I get the pressure. It's like, well, I don't want to be the person that makes people laugh, because then maybe they wouldn't want to work with me. And I just think, again, you've got to look at how you build relationships. Like nobody goes into a sales meeting and just like pitches right away. It's always 2 to 3 minutes of small talk. And so I think like, it's okay then to put that small talk on social media, because that's how you're going to make those initial connections with people. And again, a lot of people will say, well, I don't like that, or, well, LinkedIn's changing for the worse. And it's like, well, okay, whether or not it is, or whether or not you like it, that is actually how it's going. And so just roll with it, use it to your advantage, and, test things as well. And, the one thing I would say is like, people don't remember a lot of what you post online. Like nobody remembers one of my posts from 2 weeks ago. Nobody remembers Gary Vee's post, or, Tony Robbins, or any of these guys who are like huge personal brands. No one remembers what they posted a month ago. They just remember their face. They remember like the feeling they got, and they remember like, their overarching message, which is usually just positivity and, being that type of positive person. And so again, like if you post something, it's not like, for us, it can feel like the whole world's going to see it. But the reality is we're just bombarded with so many messages that it's an irrational fear to have within itself.
Well, and I think it's because, even in the real, when you think about like outside of social, I always think about like the platforms and when you're putting yourself out there, and everyone always talks about you need to put yourself out there. And I think, pre-social, there was always that group that would go up on stage and sing karaoke, and then the people that just never would.
Yep.
And so this is kind of like that. This is like, we've got a whole message of everybody has to have a brand, everybody has to have an identity on social, and then we've got people who are just hesitant to be in the spotlight, and it feels like you're in the spotlight when you're creating that focus on self, and it's uncomfortable for some people. So how do you get someone's head around that, Joel, when they're just it cripples them to think about putting themselves, putting their real voice, especially because look, it's pretty easy to like somebody else's thought. I mean, there's not really, you don't have to be terribly committed to that. You could reshare an interesting article, but when you share your opinion, people who don't have a lot of self-confidence really struggle to even speak because they're so, I guess, crippled by the feeling that someone's going to push back and say you're wrong, or that's a stupid idea, or why would you say such an asinine thing? Didn't you know this, 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 this? Now what happens to my credibility? And I think that's what people struggle to get around.
100%. And I think, you mentioned an interesting point, like liking other people's content. I would take it a step further and just say, like, if I was to measure what's most effective on social media, I would even argue that commenting on someone's post is almost more effective than putting your own content out. And the reason being is, like, I think a lot of times, like, there's people who are saying you've got to put out your own content. You got to put out your own content. Yeah. And to me, like, if that's not where you're at, that's totally fine. But what you can do is you can actually support other people's content, and you can comment, right? And like, commenting is vastly underrated. And I think if I was to say what's going to make you more successful in social media over the next 3 months, if you've got no brand whatsoever, commenting on other people's posts will get you accelerated success over putting out your own content. And so right now we're in this weird situation where everybody's saying, well, you got to post your own stuff. You got to post your own stuff. But they're underrating, like, the fact that you can be super effective on social media if you just are commenting and you're actually consuming other people's content and you're supporting them. So I think a great example of that would be, let's say there's a hiring manager you're wanting to build a relationship with, and you notice that, maybe they're posting on Twitter or LinkedIn or Instagram. Most people are posting on one of those platforms, and a lot of times they're taking that same risk. Everything we're talking about, they're taking that same risk. And when you look, like, most people don't get that great of engagement on social media. So if you're that person that's able to show up for them,
liking and
just consistently, and I don't mean like make an activity out of it where you have like stringent metrics or you're like forcing it, but like, read it. If it catches your eye, read it, and then leave a thought. And I think to me, it's just starting a conversation, and that's massively valuable. And in fact, I think if you got in a habit of commenting, two things are going to happen. It's like, you're going to consume the content, so you start getting a feel of, oh, like, this is a type of content that people resonate with. And then you're also commenting, which is in a form that's actually content within itself. And so I think, like, there's so much emphasis right now on being a content creator. I think there needs to be more emphasis on being a content supporter and having strategies around, like, what is the goal of social media? Is the goal to get 1,000 comments? I mean, maybe, I don't know. But to me, like, I think the goal of social media, and I think the reason these platforms were created before influencing or was even a thing, the goal was, entertainment, education. Like, YouTube it was designed as entertainment, education, teaching people things. Facebook was designed to connect people up, like connect you up with family members, share your life. this influencer thing, I mean, has come out of like, I guess, opportunists that saw an opportunity there to gain followership. But when you look at like these platforms, it's really about conversation and connectivity, and it's a different way to do that. So you got to reframe your mind. And so I would say like the goal of commenting is to start that conversation, spend time doing that. And I think like if you're afraid of that, and because that is a form of putting yourself out there, I think I would just challenge you in that and say, try it, try it and see how that works. But if you're not, like, for example, if you're not comfortable in video, I don't advise just jumping on video because it's going to feel forced. Like, don't force yourself to do things, but there's a balance. Like, I think there's certain times when you've got to push yourself a little bit. And then there's certain times where like, okay, you're just not ready for something. So start with the baby steps. If you're not comfortable being the main singer on the karaoke, be like the person that's like cheering the person on who's doing the karaoke. So that would be my thoughts. And I think for a lot of this stuff, like I get it because it can be unnatural. And especially if you're like introverted or you're somebody who's not used to putting yourself out there. So become that supporter, support other people first.
Right.
And that's, to me, it's highly valuable.
You're still becoming, and Kat just said in the wings too, that she got one of her clients just based on a comment she made on someone else's post. But I think it's true. I think it's you're starting to show up. You're starting to become a familiar face in the community. I mean, that's part of it, right? People are like, oh, Joel, yeah, he's always commenting on these types of. I mean, that's part of it. You become a familiar face.
You become a familiar face, and you become somebody who is a giver, and I think like giving is just a big deal. And I think people they underrate like the power of just giving on social media, and it's super easy. And the reason that is because again, it's like everybody's so focused on their own personal brand, they're not thinking like, oh, here's a shortcut. Like someone else is trying to build their personal brand. Why don't I help them build their personal brand? And there's somebody in the States who I talk to a lot. So her name's Judy Fox. She's pretty well known on LinkedIn over here, and she doesn't really post any content. Like she used to post a lot, but she rarely posts that much content. And she's huge about this, and she's like coaches her clients like show up for the people that you want to do business with, and it's a great way to get in front of them. Because again, like when I think of like if we were to break this down from a sales point of view, most people need like 8 to 10 points of contact or points of reference before they start to even trust you to take a call. And so if you think about it, like you send them a connection request. Okay, that's 1. They accept it. That's 2. You could just DM them. That's 3, but then they're probably going to never respond to you again. So you've lost them. Instead, if you just follow them for a little bit and you start to see that they're putting out content, they don't even need to put out their own content. How about this one? Like they make a comment and then you go and respond to their comment on someone else's content. They're probably going to be intrigued by you. What are they going to do? They're going to look at your profile. Now you got to make sure your profile is set up to where it looks like you can solve the problem that you think that they have. But then you start to think a little bit more strategically because right now everybody is doing the connect message. It sucks. It's taken away it's taken away the point of like this. So, and maybe it's not on LinkedIn or, maybe it's on Twitter and maybe they just retweet something and then you comment and say, hey, it's super interesting. Like, yeah. And like, obviously again, you want to be genuine and authentic about it. So you don't want to force these things, but again, there's ways to get in front of people. And if you do that for a month and then you DM them, they're at least gonna have a good feeling about who you are, and they'll probably give you time because hey, you've been supporting them, and
it doesn't feel as salesy because it's very easy to just feel no straight out of the gate when someone connects, and then you get their automated message, which is my favorite. I connect, accept, and then I automatically within a second get this long. So I know it's automated.
They've got to do something. I mean, right now, I think the biggest detriment to LinkedIn is these automated bots.
We were talking about,
and it's sad because it's like it ruins it for everybody, and it's like most of us are out there. We have good intentions. We want to connect. Sure. Okay. I'm not going to hate on somebody because they want to sell. Like, I respect that.
Right.
But it's just, for LinkedIn, they've got to get a grasp on that, because they're going to have mass exodus of people just leaving. And I think people already are. And so, where does that leave us? Well, I think you have to try and connect with other people in a public forum and get a little bit more strategic with it. And like you said, it's like, I think from a recruitment standpoint, it's like we are going to be somewhat salesy, and that's okay.
Good job.
And it's like, you can't get away from that. And like, I think we're always there's no perfect way to turn something that's cold into something that's warm, into something that's, hey, now we're doing business. That's always going to be a process. And I think, to me, that's more to do with like relationships, and just understanding that like relationships in any context take time, and like there's no way to hack that. So anyone who's telling you that they've got like this formula, it's nonsense. Like, relationships will inherently take time. And so I think we've got to think about that and be realistic and go, okay, if I show up, for a month, I get they've got a feeling for who I am. Maybe we have some cool interactions online, but it's still going to feel pitchy when we reach out to them. It's just, you can build up a little bit more of that trust. So I think a lot of times when people are selling these LinkedIn solutions, it's like they're selling it like it's this magic thing. It's not. It's still going to take time, and it's still that understanding that some people just aren't going to relate to you. And I think if you understand that, then it takes that pressure off. And so I look at it. My goal now is, when I think about how big markets are, and we have access, like, we don't just have our local market anymore. We can go national, we can go international. So in my mind, I'm just like, okay, there's probably, hundreds of thousands of people who are prospects, but I just want to find like the 500 to 1,000 that will do business with me. And I think from a recruitment standpoint, I mean, what do you need? Like 10 or 15 like solid clients? That should take the pressure off. And then you realize, like, okay, let me just try and connect with the people who I like first, and then I can bring value to them and do business with them. And then I think it kind of takes that pressure off. Like, again, going back to what I said at the beginning, where it's like, some people want to do work with you, some people don't. If you understand that, you can start to like look at social as a little bit more fun, and like finding people who are like-minded that you want to connect with, that you can serve and you can have a good relationship with. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. So when you're talking to people about patience, and when you're working with a new recruiter, and they're saying, okay, so now when will the leads come? I mean, how are you setting expectations there? Like, what do you think is realistic? Like, if you're very committed to, the program, whatever program, you're promoting, I'm sure that it's got, all right, a set number of posts or activity. Like, what are you setting up as a realistic expectation for them to see some sort of return?
I think it comes back to even that story I said at the beginning, where, for me, it was 9 months when I got that true cold, never met this person, hey, I want to work with you. 9 months it took me, and that was doing it every day. But I think, like, if you're known in your marketplace and you have a lot of credibility, I think within the first 8 weeks, you're going to see people that you've placed in the past that are now maybe hiring managers. You're going to see people that maybe you worked with. You're going to see people that they're going to be the first people that reach out and say, hey, for some reason I was thinking about you, or I saw your post, it made me think of you. So I think that's a realistic expectation, right? Like, early on, like, you're going to see people that I think as far as cold, like you've never met this person, 3 to 6 months is a realistic thought. But again, that I say that because I want to create a realistic expectation, because I think if I pitch it as, hey, this is a 4-week, you get a 6-pack program, right? You're going to be super disappointed. And my vision is, like, I want people to change their mindset and go, okay, this content thing, it's not like this quick fix because cold calling's hard. It's really an additional daily thing that I want to build into a long-term strategy. And whether it's LinkedIn or Twitter or Instagram, you can build followings on all of these platforms. It's just, it literally is consistency. It's showing up, and it's having a strategy that you can stick to. And I think, like, discipline will carry you through when motivation goes away. the problem is there's a lot of people out there who are like motivating people, but they're not really like teaching them like the foundations of discipline. And so it'd be ridiculous for me to say, you know, people like cold calling's just a great example. Like when you start in recruiting, it's not like cold calling's this magic pill where suddenly you get like 10 job orders and you suddenly reach a hold of people. No, when you start in recruiting, you know, 3 to 6 months is the expectation for that first placement. So why wouldn't you put that same expectation with content? 3 to 6 months, being consistent, instead of having a 1 hour call block, you've got a 1 hour content creation. You know, and then the next thing that comes is like people like, well, so now when I'm doing this, I don't have to do cold calling. No, you're still going to do the outbound. The goal is like, you want to have different channels to reach people. Like you want to do email, you want to do some cold calling, you want to do some social. It's not like these things are battling against each other. They're all part of the same strategy, right? Which is to reach people, start conversations, build relationships. So I say that time. And I think for me, like the worst thing and the thing that I hate the most is like when people have expectations and then it's like things they're disappointed, because I think like disappointment, particularly with something that's like a long-term play, disappointment in the short term is just so hard to deal with. So with me, I'm realistic about it. And, you know, and then I think maybe I lose some people with that because they thought it was just going to be like a 2-week thing.
And
I'm
then
okay with that.
Six-pack, right?
Exactly.
But just like that, I mean, you have to stick to the program and
stick to it. Exactly.
And just like a fitness program, you're going to get out of it what you put in. And if you kind of half-ass the squats, well, you're not going to be as ripped as the guy who's doing it all the way. And I feel like a lot of it is done out of, I have to put something up on social. I haven't done that in a while. And that doesn't add value. You know, that's just, I feel like you've got to be passionate about it and you've got to be committed to it. And then the other part of it is, how much of this is, or how many times is there conflict between my voice and my employer? This is one of the things I've seen is, you know, people who are like, well, this is what I'm going to say. And then I think to myself when I read that, oh my gosh, I wonder what their employer thinks about that.
And I think that, okay, so that's where I think the conversation between like authenticity and vulnerability comes in, where like, you know, you choose the level of your opinions that you put out there and how personal you get. So I know people who have exploded on social media with like kind of controversial stuff. Like the person I think of the most here in the States is Shay Rowbottom. Like she's like the video LinkedIn queen. You know, she throws out there some pretty strong opinions, but she's an entrepreneur, you know, so it works with her. And trust me, it rubs a lot of people off, you know, it rubs people off the wrong way. I've spoken to those people before. I would never work with her because of that. But, you know, the people who do work with her, they're like in love with who she is as a person. And so, but that's a personal choice. So I don't think like content has to be like, I don't think you have to be like that. And I think you can be authentic with not sharing a lot. And I think like Gary Vee for me is the best example, because if you look through his content, you never see him post about his family or his kids. You never see anything about that. He keeps that super hidden, but when he shows up, he's just authentic. He's himself, but he doesn't talk about his personal life at all. Me, on the other hand, like I just shared on LinkedIn, hey, I'm having a baby and, you know, in September. And people loved it. People were all about that. That was my personal choice. Now, if I worked for an employer, I think, you've got to be mindful. If they're the ones paying your checks, you've got to be mindful of that. My advice would be have the conversation with whoever it is that you report to. Say, hey, I'm looking at posting some content. Is there anything I should be careful of? Or is there anything that you don't want me to share? Have that conversation with them. You know, like just lay it out there and explain, like, here's my strategy. I want to post. I want to post about some of the recruitment stories I've had. I want to post about some of these things. Like, do you feel comfortable about that? Like, lay it out for them. Why not have that conversation? I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think to your point before where you were saying, like, you know, like you, with this stuff, like you don't want it to be something that you just like feel like you have to do. I think what I'm trying to train people to do is like find the joy behind it and find the passion. Like for some people, they might find that like doing video is amazing and they love doing video. Cool. Double down on video. those same people, they're not good at writing, so don't do writing. Maybe you're somebody who like hates video, but you're okay with like short little quotes, or maybe like memes is your thing. You know what I mean? Like, cool. If that's what you enjoy, show up. Like, no matter how you show up, as long as you're consistent about it, and if you actually enjoy it, it does better. And so like, you just got to find what you enjoy. I think a lot of times, like, even when I'm talking to people, they're like, oh, so you're going to make me do video? I'm like, you want to do some video, do some video.
Right.
Like, if that's what you enjoy. If you enjoy doing a podcast, start a podcast. But the only way that you're actually going to be able to do it long term, to your point, is if you experiment and you find what you enjoy. And that's part of my job, right? Like when I'm teaching people, it's like, experiment with it, try it. And maybe you're like, I love doing LinkedIn stories. Awesome. Then you're probably going to be able to do LinkedIn stories for a long time. Other people, sometimes I think like if you're forcing it too much, it's just not sustainable. Same thing, you know, when we look at the gym, for example, if the bike is your thing, cool, double down on the bike. If the treadmill is your thing, do your thing. If weights is your thing, find what you enjoy about these discipline things, and it's going to be easier to keep on. But just have an open mind with it, like experiment and try, because I think a lot of people, like, they think they won't like something and then they do it and they're like, oh my gosh, like once I broke through that little nervousness, like I actually enjoy this. And then, like I said, run through with your employer, the people who pay you, and make sure and let them know what you're doing. Like, I think if you do it on the side and then they catch you, or like you feel like that, that's not a great feeling. But if you're just open about it and say, hey, this is what I'm trying to do. Like, I'm trying to grow my business, and which it's going to grow your business. Like, what are your thoughts with that? I think most employees would support most employers would support their team on that. Or maybe they give you some guidelines and say, okay, well, we're totally fine with you, but we don't feel like you comfortable with you sharing like your political views. And you go, okay, great. Right. Neither do I. That's totally fine. Yeah. We're in line with that. So just have that conversation, and
that's one of the things I thought about, though, because when we come to the table and we're passionate about something specifically, we bring our opinions and then we bring our personal views. And so, especially this whole political area, I'm thinking, I have seen some people who have posted things where I'm like, I bet their employer is going nuts right now.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe not. Maybe their employer is completely aligned with that opinion or thinking. How often do you see it being a problem for people?
I've seen people get fired. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, like I've seen people get fired. I've seen people get fired because they leave a comment on something.
Yeah.
My personal take with this is, I don't post anything about politics. I don't post anything about religion. My whole thing has just been like, I post about LinkedIn and content and recruitment and motivation. That's what I post about. Do I think like it's okay to post? I think you're an adult, so I think you can say whatever you want to say. Yeah. What I've noticed is, like, even when I show up with positive messages, we talked about it before, like I get people who hate it. Like I've had people email me calling me like a washed out idiot. Like I've had people say stuff about my wife. Like, people are mean, and people will say stuff. Yeah. So that's always going to be a risk. But my personal take on that is like what I do is like, I don't talk about any of that stuff because I don't want the risks associated with it. But I leave that up to people. Like if you're really passionate about it, then it's cool to share it. But just know that, like, like I said, I've seen people get fired. And I see Louise just said, I rarely share a personal view online, but I suspect people feel they know me quite well regardless. And that's the thing too. It's like with a lot of those conversations, it's not that I don't talk about those things. I just typically talk about them offline with people that I trust. So like I've shared those views, but again, that's my personal preference, and I think it works for some people, and I think Shay's a good example of that.
I think it's the fine line between people mistaking authenticity with me having to share my personal views.
Exactly.
And it's really not, to be authentic, you don't have to share your personal story. your
No.
personal views, your personal details. It's your voice. It's your tone. It's you being true to yourself, but you don't necessarily have to go into this is what I feel politically. I think that's where people
Exactly.
where there's confusion.
Here's the benchmark. This is what authenticity is. If you can, and I challenge anyone out there, go look at my LinkedIn posts, come back to this conversation, and if I'm the same person in this conversation, then take it a step further and have a conversation with me offline. It's all got to line up. Like you don't, and in fact, like that's really powerful. And so, let's say you're putting out a series of LinkedIn videos. If you're like, oh my gosh, this is so great, and blah 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 blah, and then they meet you in real life, and you're just like, okay, how's it going? It doesn't work well, and that's not being authentic. It doesn't matter if you're even sharing like real stories. You're not like actually being who you are. So I think like that's the benchmark. Like when you go through the content, when you do your videos, when you do whatever it is, and how you show up, when people talk to you offline, do they feel like you're the same person? That's a bench line. Have we talked about anything personal here? No. I mean, I shared where I'm just having a baby, so that's probably about as personal as we got. But I think the reason though, like where there's that kind of interesting line with the personal stuff is because when it comes to content, without a doubt, like personal stories. So if you start openly sharing about like mental health, which I've done in the past, like I've shared about like some of my mental health struggles, those posts do really, really well. And so I think then people are like, oh, well, that's the key then, right? Like if you just share really personal stuff, and it's like, yeah, that stuff is going to do well, but there's cost associated with it. Like if I start talking about mental health and a CEO reads that and it's like, oh, why is this guy talking about mental health in business? He'll never do business with me. So that's the risk I take. And so, so I don't know. I think you've just got to know like what your own personal line is. And again, like how are you in real life? Like, are you a pretty closed off person in conversations? Do you have a lot of, privacy, like in your conversations with even friends? Mm-hmm. Then that's probably how you should show up online. I'm a pretty open book. Like I'll have a conversation with anyone about anything. So I'm okay to show up online, but I recognize like I would never pressure somebody and be like, well, you've got to tell that story about that really hard time you went through. No, that's your own. If you want to share it, cool. And if you want to like share it because you have vision to help other people, even better. If you want to share it because like the personal branding coach you're working with told you that that's how you're going to get views, I wouldn't do it.
Joel, I appreciate all of your insight, and I think that this was really productive conversation. I'm hoping it brings some people out of their shells and start to see some new folks on LinkedIn. I love it, and I
just have fun with it.
Yeah, I think that I think you're right. I think it's just about getting started, and it like anything, you struggle, you're a little sloppy the first few times, and then you get better, right?
I can tell you, like the first post that I did, and I'll tell you guys this because it's just so bad. I did this thing called emoji math. Okay. And it's just, yeah, exactly. Your face right there describes it. It was bad. It was like time plus effort equals money. And it was like all in emojis. And then I was like heart, so like love plus something equal. And it was literally that. And I thought it was like the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
I posted it on a Sunday and it got like 5 likes and nobody commented. I was like, what the heck? This is like the best thing I've ever done. Then I did one like what I did like the LinkedIn 10 commandments, and it was like, don't sell. And I just like kind of just lame stuff. And I look back at that stuff. I would never post that now.
No.
But I'm, 2 years into doing it, and, just to give some, I don't necessarily like always talking about like the stats of things, but, it's like I post 3 times a day. And typically now I'm at a point where, those posts will get anywhere from 10,000 views all the way up to 100,000 views, maybe more. But it took like, it took I started posting once a day, did that for about 6 months. And I went to 2 times a day, did that for about 6 months. And then I started posting 3 times a day. And, but it took time to get to that point. It took a lot of practice. And I see Kat said, practice, practice, practice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is really the key, because it's like you're practicing your own skill, but you're also like seeing like what do people respond to. And, everybody has a different audience. And so like I work with some clients who their audience is like high level CEOs, and they're wanting to position themselves different, so my strategy for myself is like, I'm trying to disrupt the recruitment industry. So I'm going to have bold content. I'm also like relatively new in my career. I'm 5 years in. So that's relatively new. And so am I going to position myself as like a guru thought leader? No, I'm not. So there's some strategy in that. Like, I'm not going to position myself as like this like person that knows all about like scaling businesses. It's not who I am, but I'm positioning myself as being authentic. And so for some people, it's like, you can look at my content and be like, I don't want to do it that way. 100%. You want to do it your way. And so I have clients who they're in like, maybe the health tech space, and, they're working with CEOs and high level sales people. Your content's going to look different. So you've got to figure out that as well. Like, who am I trying to position myself to be, as well as who is my audience? Mm-hmm. But the only way you get that, to Kat's point, is you've kind of got to practice. I don't know, like, whether, I think practice is part of it, but I think like a word I like to use is experiment. Yeah. Like, experiment and test. Experiment, test, learn. Experiment, test, learn. And you've got to kind of treat it like that and figure it out, and just know, like, I had a CEO that I worked with, and he was one of the most charismatic guys that I know. And he's built a business that's, when I started with them, they had 2 million. They were getting 2 million a year, and when I left, they were getting 20 million a year. So he scaled a big business. And I asked him, I was like, why don't you share more online? He said, well, I don't want to lose one of my big clients. And I'm like, why would you lose a big client? He's like, well, if they see something I posted. And I'm like, if the relationship is that frail, why are you working with them? You need to be thinking about the 3 CEOs that are going to connect with your message, that are 10 times bigger than your current client. And I think that's the mindset you're going to have. Like, literally the worst thing that can happen is people are going to scroll by and they're going to ignore it. Maybe they'll block you, but if your relationship with your client is that frail, I don't know if that's a real relationship. Like, let's just think about it like logically. So yeah, test, experiment, and just go. And let's see, I only share personal views online. I only ever share personal views online.
Steven does. He's got a very big voice.
Dude, I love that. well, that's the thing though. But that's like, I love that you said that, because, I think you're right in that, because obviously everyone has their own personal view and opinion. I just think that there's different levels to like how people feel with that. But hey, man, if that's you and that's working for you as well, then I love that, I wouldn't.
And that is 100% his authentic self. So
I gotta go check that out though now, Steven. I'm gonna go check it out, because
I'm him curious. Out. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of people checking your profile out. Joel's link to Joel's profile is up at the top of the chat here. Connect with him. He's got a lot of great things to say. Joel, I'm terrible at running time, so we're over, of course. So
all good.
Thank you. I mean, what a good conversation. And I hope that everybody is going to start following. You've got great content. I've been following regularly. So tomorrow we actually have another show. No, Friday, Louise is on. Louise is going to be talking about data as the new currency for recruiters, and she's going to be on with Matt Me. Thank you, Joel. I sure appreciate your time. I'm excited to go and challenge myself a little bit more on LinkedIn. I'm sure some other folks will too. And I hope that everyone.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here, and everyone who's out there too. I just leave you with, if you're thinking about it, just do it. Like I said, we talked about like blasting through that fear, and I do believe like there is that element to it as well. But I'm also here to support. So do me a favor though, if you are going to connect with me on LinkedIn, just let me know. Hey, I saw you on a recruitment working lunch, because I got a lot of invitations in there and I can't really keep track of them. So just put a little personal note, and I'm always happy to connect. And,
I had to go through email. You got a pretty busy,
yeah, yeah,
busy inbox.
Busy inbox, and but I appreciate all you guys out there, and I love how engaged you were in this conversation. I think you guys have an awesome community, and to me, like, community is everything. So I really appreciate it. And thank you, Debbie. You're awesome.
Yeah,
You're so much fun. So much fun at like 6 a.m. No, I'm sorry. It's like 8 o'clock here, so we're all good.
Awesome. Well, I look forward to staying in touch with you. I hope everyone has a great week. Take care.
See you guys.